Well, I'm available to start at right tackle.
You can't see when I have clothes on.
All right. Well, there's not an even playing field. There's never been an even playing field. There never will be an even playing field.
What shampoo do you use on your hair?
You don't need to be Superman to play in this offense.
You're listening to The Red Zone.
Welcome, Badgers fans, to another episode of The Red Zone. We only have one practice of fall camp left, or at least one open practice that us and the media get to watch. So I thought it was a good time to bring Jesse Temple on and talk about what we've seen so far. How you doing, Jesse?
I'm good. How are you, Jason?
Doing good, and we're going to format this one with a little over-unders. You know, I think in the media we've done this privately for a couple of years, but now we're going to do it on the podcast, and just we're going to go through and have one number per position, basically, and decide if we think it's going to go over or under. You ready to do this, Jesse?
Oh, yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Well, let's start with the running backs. For the number I made up for this one was, will the rushing yards for the Badgers' second leading rusher be over or under 500 yards? What do you think, Jesse?
Okay, I'm going to take the over. And last year, the number 2 running back was Bradrick Shaw in terms of yardage. He had 365 yards. So 500's a little high, maybe. But if you look at the guys last year who got carries after Jonathan Taylor, Shaw, Chris James, Garrett Groshek, Rashid Ibrahim, those 4 guys combined for 1,025 yards. So there are carries and there are yards to be had. And I think I'm going to take this further and pick the guy who I think it's going to be.
Oh, okay.
I think it's going to be Taiwan Deal. I really do. And, John Settle, I had a chance to talk to him earlier this week. He thinks Taiwan is the number 2 guy right now. He thinks he's moved ahead of Chris James. He says nothing bad that James has done. It's just Taiwan is finally starting to show everything that they hoped. And his biggest issue is that he hasn't been healthy. He didn't play last season. He played in 6 games the year before. I think it's very easy to forget that in 2015, he was a pretty good running back. He was kind of thrown in there when Corey Clement got hurt, but he rushed for over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns against Hawaii. He had 90 yards and 2 touchdowns against Minnesota. It's just been a matter of, can he be healthy? And he's been healthy in fall camp, so he looks pretty good to me.
I agree with you that if somebody goes over 500, I think it'll be Taiwan Deal, but I'm going to disagree and take the under here.
Oof.
Yeah, disagreement on the first one. You mentioned that there were a lot of carries and yards to be had there, but I kind of think it's just going to be split up between a lot of guys like it was last season. I think Chris James is still going to take a lot of the third down work, so I think that I don't think he's going to reach 500. I just don't think there'll be enough carries for him. I think he's going to get a lot of playing time still, but I just don't think he's going to be given the carries it's going to take for him to get to over 500. And I think once Bradrick Shaw gets healthy, I think they're targeting sort of Big Ten play for him to at least be healthy and try to give them something. I think that maybe he's going to fight with Deal for some of those carries. Now, if Taiwan comes out and plays really well the first few games, then maybe Shaw doesn't get that opportunity and Deal goes on to get the 500 yards. But I just think that at some point, maybe Nakia Watson later in the season at least gets a little bit of work. So I think that, I think looking at the whole landscape with Shaw coming back at some point, I'm going to go ahead and go under 500 for that.
I just did the quick math here. 500 yards divided by 14 games. Hypothetically speaking, Wisconsin plays the Big Ten Championship, goes to a bowl. This is excluding a potential national championship appearance, which would be a 15th game. The guy would need 36 yards rushing a game. So
it's not very much.
It doesn't sound like a lot, so I'm just going to throw that out there. And I guess in 4 months we can decide whether we were wrong or right, but I'll take the over for now.
I'm definitely going to have you on the podcast near the end of the season.
Oh, boy.
So we can go
it's going to be
again.
A disaster.
But, yeah, I mean, it's funny because Wisconsin went through a big stretch here where it would have been crazy for their second running back to not get 500 yards. But I think the last couple of years, it's we'll see. I think this is why the number's at 500, because it's you can have the debate. So
the other thing to consider is that Jonathan Taylor is probably not going to get 2,000 yards this season because he's not going to carry the ball as much because they've got 4 really talented wide receivers. And so if you just think about it and think maybe if they throw a little bit more, that might limit more rushing opportunities as well. So I'm not talking myself out of my pick, but there's a rationale for both sides.
Let's move on to outside linebackers, where I have, this is kind of just, I should have put these in a better order, but this is just going to be random position by position. Zach Bond and Andrew Van Ginkel combined sacks. I have it at 13.5. What do you say?
I am reluctantly taking the under. And Van Ginkel was awesome last year. He had 6.5 sacks. He didn't even start any games because Garrett Dooley and Leon Jacobs obviously were the starters. But Dooley and Jacobs last year, they combined for 11 sacks. I get that they're different body types. I think Jacobs only had 3.5 or something like that. So I'm really intrigued by what Zach Bond and Andrew Van Ginkel can do, because they have different body types. Their emphasis is on speed. Like Bond weighs 230 and Van Ginkel's 236, and Dooley and Jacobs were 245, 246. But I don't know. I guess for now I just feel like I'm going to take the under. But who knows? Maybe Van Ginkel gets it all by himself, because he was just a beast, especially down the stretch against Ohio State and Miami.
Yeah, I kind of think if it goes over, it's going to be because Van Ginkel had a lot and really exceeded our expectations. But I'm taking the under as well. You mentioned Dooley and Jacobs only had 11 combined last year, which I think people would be a little surprised by. I went to the last couple of years before that. Watt and Beagle the year before that had 15.5, and then Schobert and Beagle in 2015 had 17.5. So those are pretty high numbers. But I really want to see Zach Bond out there in an actual game and see what he can do. I don't foresee him becoming necessarily sort of a guy that's going to explode for a bunch of sacks this year. I think that he has a lot of potential and he could do a lot of good things for them. But I think if this goes over, it's probably going to be because Van Ginkel got like 10 sacks or something like that. So I'm going to go ahead and take the under now. This was a difficult one. I think these are all difficult for me because I set the number, but I'm going to go.
You are the Vegas odds maker in this particular case.
Exactly. So I'm going to take the under right now, and you also have to worry about Bond being able to stay on the field. He's had a lot of trouble with that as well. So if he misses some games for whatever reason, then that's obviously going to lower the chances of that one going over. Let's move on to wide receiver, where I have the talk of the offseason almost, Aron Cruickshank. Number of catches over under 9.5.
I am taking the under. I feel like this is another kind of reluctantly, like, yes, he was the unofficial spring practice MVP, and I would also say that 3 of the top 4 guys didn't participate in all of spring practice because they had various injuries. I know Danny Davis was out with an abdominal injury, and Quintus Cephas obviously was coming back from his broken leg, and Pryor played some, but not all of the spring. But I'm taking the under because I just don't know how many opportunities are going to be left after those top 4 guys, and after the tight ends get theirs, and after the running backs get theirs. Now, what I will say is I talked to receivers coach Ted Gilmore this week, and I asked him how he planned on using Cruikshank, and he said he'll be part of a package, I'll put it that way. And that makes sense because he's so talented and fast, which is something that, as Gilmore says often, that's speed you can't teach. You've got to find a way to get him on the field. On the other hand, Gilmore also told me that Cruikshank is still just a freshman, and he's still trying to figure out how to learn. And Gilmore told me that mentally, basically, Cruikshank isn't ready for the full load at this point. And sometimes he has to remind Cruikshank when he's watching practice that even though you're not in, you have to take that mental rep. So I still think, for as athletic and talented as he is, if you're asking me whether he gets 10 catches or more, I'm taking the under for now. But he could be very exciting in the return game. I think he's going to contribute this season in some way for sure.
Yeah, as impressive as he's been, I feel like he's pretty clearly still the number 5 receiver on the team, especially after the camp that Kendrick Pryor had. And Kendrick Pryor's been one of the most impressive guys out there this fall. And I just don't see how Cruikshank's going to break into that top 4. Like you mentioned, I also heard more back in the spring that Cruikshank was still kind of learning things and maybe didn't have the whole grasp of the playbook. So if he's still struggling with that, then that kind of limits his opportunity as well. So I'm going to take the under at 9.5. I think injuries could potentially make this go over. If they get 1 or 2 guys at the receiver position injured, he might be forced to step in and play a lot more. But as of right now, I'm going to go with the under here. Let's move on to inside linebackers. Tj Edwards, over under 95 tackles. This is a pretty high. This would be a career high for him. He only had 81 last year, and then 89 the year before when he missed 1 game. So what do you think about this one?
I am taking the under. I think the most he had was when he was 2016. He had 89, and I think as a redshirt freshman he had 84. And last year he had 75, and Ryan Connolly was actually the leading tackler. If I'm not mistaken.
Did I read that wrong? I was looking at the stats, possibly.
I think he had 75. All the listeners can go back and check.
Yeah.
But I know he was second on the team. Maybe it was in the 80s. But I'm gonna take the under. Like 95. That's a lot of tackles, and I know he's been an exceptional player. Maybe Connolly winds up leading the team again in tackles. I think he was pretty underrated as an inside backer for what he accomplished last season, and even before that, and the opportunities that he got.
Yeah, I'm actually gonna go over here. I know it's a pretty high number, and he hasn't reached that yet. But I think if you look at his 2016 season, if he didn't miss that first game, he would have been right around that number. And I think with as many, inexperienced guys around him in that front seven, I think they're going to need him to make, all the tackles he can. Now, you could also make the argument that, maybe things won't be opened up as much for him with less talent or less experience around him, especially on the defensive line in front of him. But I feel like he's the best player on this defense. Far and away best player on this defense, in my opinion. And I just think he's going to have a spectacular senior year. So I'm just expecting an All-American type season where he flirts with that 100 tackle mark. Maybe it won't happen, but I'm a big believer in Tj Edwards, and I think that he's gonna step up and kind of go up another mini level here this season. Okay, Alex Hornibrook. This is actually not.
You're right.
This is actually.
Sorry, he had 81 tackles.
Oh, okay. I was proven right. I thought surely I was wrong when I
said 75. But either way, he had 81. Connolly had 88. So just did a little quick research there. Make sure we get it right for the podcast listeners.
So 81 tackles. Did you want to change yours to over now that you know that?
No, because I don't know. I'm
joking.
I'm going to go with the under.
Okay, so Alex Hornibrook at quarterback. This is actually not an interception number. I decided to go with the yardage number. Over under 3,000 yards. He had 2,644 last season.
I am taking the under. This is based on the assumption, again, that the Badgers do play in 14 games. Last year he averaged 188.9 yards per game, and even if he averages 200 yards per game, which I think is pretty good, that's 2,800 yards for a whole season. Now, could he get to 3,000? Certainly. I don't know. This is a tough one for me because I just wrote a story that ran today, shameless plug for The Athletic, on Wisconsin's top 4 wide receivers and how talented they are and what they've worked on this offseason. And I think this has a chance to be the most talented group collectively that Wisconsin has had at the receiver position. And you've got a returning quarterback. And so while it's possible, I still think you've got the Heisman Trophy candidate at running back with Jonathan Taylor and a number of other guys. I'm going to take the under 3,000, but certainly I think he's going to improve on what he did last year, and I think he might come close.
And you also just reminded me that I did not say you are from The Athletic.
You did not. I wasn't going to say anything, but if you made it this far, you probably know. Yes,
so
I cover the Badgers
go
for
subscribe to The Athletic. Jesse does some great work. I will mention it again at the end of the podcast. So I'm going under 2 on the Hornibrook 3,000 yards. I think with the weapons around him returning, I think he's going to have a better season. I think he'll cut down on his interception total a little bit, maybe have, 10 or 12 interceptions, something like that, rather than 15. But I think he's going to get close to that 3,000 yard mark, but I just don't think he's quite going to get there. I think it's a little bit tougher schedule, a lot tougher games on the road as well. Michigan's defense should be even better than it was last year. I think Penn State's defense is going to be good. Iowa's and Northwestern are going to be pretty tough games on the road. So I think there's might be some road games where maybe he doesn't put up the statistics that maybe he would otherwise. And I just think he's going to have a really good season, but he's not quite going to get there. I think it's I could definitely see it happening. He's only 356 yards last year from getting there, but I'm going to go with the under. Okay, this next one was a pretty tough one for me. Interceptions by defensive backs. Now we went with 10.5 here. Now for some reference, last year the defensive backs had 10 interceptions. The year before that they had 16, and in 2015 they had 11. So what do you think this year?
I'm gonna go under, and you're right. They had 10 last year, but most of those went to guys who aren't here anymore. Joe Ferguson had 4. Derek Tyndall and Natrell Jamerson had 2. And Dante Carrier-Williams and Dakota Dixon had 1 each. I think Wisconsin's linebackers have been great at getting interceptions, and I guess I'm not ready to say that with a group this young they'll surpass the numbers from last season. And, I mean, look, Jason, we've been watching almost every fall camp practice to this point, and I don't think either one of us can definitively say who the starting cornerbacks are. I don't think that, means they don't have talent, but, Jim Leonhard has been rotating through 4 or 5 different guys to try and figure out who he can trust out there, who he feels like won't have to rely on the calls from Dakota Dixon at safety. Like that, he said that was another reason he's been doing it, is to throw him in with different safeties, because he needs to know who he can trust. And there's a lot of talent there, and certainly they could prove me wrong, but at this stage, I'm going to take the under. And really, like the last 2 years, the interception totals have been incredible. 22 when Leonhard was the DB's coach, and then 20 last year. Yeah. That's not something that we saw a lot before that time.
Yeah, when I made this number, I think it was Thursday morning, I really thought I was going to go over. And then we talked to Leonhard on Thursday later in the day, and he really came out and said that basically these cornerbacks just weren't at the point where they were really making big plays as far as forcing those turnovers. And he said that was still something they were working on, and these guys weren't. And we could kind of see that during camp. I mean, you can see that there weren't a whole lot of interceptions thrown to the cornerbacks. They hadn't kind of taken that step as far as making great plays on the ball and having the hands to hold on to them. But I do think a big reason why I thought I was going to go over initially, and I am going under, but I think a big reason why I was going to go over is because I think Scott Nelson might really be a real ball hawking type of safety. He's gotten 3 interceptions this fall, and I think he's a guy that I think he could lead them in interceptions this year. I think he could have like 5 by himself. I think that's very possible, and so that made me lean toward over. But I think after hearing that from Leonhard, and then realizing that there really haven't been a ton of cornerback interceptions this camp, I think I'm going to go slightly under. But this was a tough one for me. But I'm sticking with the under. So we got a few left here. I think we only have 2 disagreements so far. So hopefully we have a couple more. But we're moving on to the tight ends. Receptions by UW's top pass catching tight end, and it's 19.5. I'll tell you why I made that number 19.5. For 14 straight seasons, Wisconsin has had a tight end catch at least 20 passes. Do you think that continues?
I do. I'm taking the over. Troy Fumagalli caught 46 passes last season, and I realized that that's an NFL draft pick right there, who's a really darn good player, and oftentimes was Alex's safety valve. But I think Xander Neville had 9, Kyle Peniston had 7. We've heard a lot about Jake Ferguson. I don't know if he's going to go over 20 this year, this early in his career. But, I mean, if Neville is healthy, and Peniston, I think, from what we saw in red zone drills after practice Friday, had a couple nice grabs in the end zone. I just think, yes, somebody is going to go over 20, although I can't tell you who right now.
Yeah, the number maybe is a tad low just because of that stat I said about 14 straight years. So I am going over as well. I don't necessarily think they're going to have a major threat at tight end, like a Fumagalli type threat. I don't think anybody's going to catch 40 passes like Fumagalli has the last couple of years. But I think it's going to be Peniston. I think he'll catch somewhere between 20 and 30, and I think he'll have a pretty good season in the passing game. So I do think it's going to go over, but I think this is for the first time in a while. I think that streak is actually in jeopardy. But let's move on here to the defensive line. This might have been my worst one, honestly.
No, but, this is okay. I'm on board with this one.
Okay, freshmen on the defensive line who will play meaningful snaps, and the number was 4.5.
So there are obviously 4 right off the bat who are going to play, and I'm assuming you are also referencing redshirt freshmen.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so nose guard Bryson Williams, and then you've got defensive ends with Caden Lyles, Matt Henningsen, and Aaron Vopel. And I'm sure as you put this together, the question is, will Isaiah Mullins be the 5th freshman to crack the rotation and play meaningful snaps? So the redshirt rule makes this interesting to me because at this stage, I think it's pretty clear that he is not in the group that is going to be playing early in the season. But with this redshirt rule that the NCAA implemented, players can now appear in 4 games and still retain the redshirt. And I think this is so beneficial, particularly for a program like Wisconsin that gets the label as a developmental program, which I think has some type of stigma, but I think it's a great thing. Players get so much better between now, when it's 2 weeks into fall camp in August, and October or November, that maybe he makes that leap. I'm going to take the under for now, but I think the good example that you can use as somebody who develops and is ready to play is just last season. You mentioned Scott Nelson and kind of what a ball-hawking safety he is. He was ready to play, and he could have played late last season, but at that time they weren't in a position to have him play and keep his red shirt. So I'm going, having said all that, I'm going to go the under, but I know that Anoke Brechterfield and the staff is very high on Isaiah Mullins, who was just dominant in Columbus, Ohio. What is he, like 292 pounds or something like that? I mean, he's a big boy.
Yeah, I'm actually gonna go under as well. I really,
come on, Jason.
But if we only have like two different, then I'm gonna change this one to over after the podcast. But so we have some more different. But I think that the thing about Mullins, you said, he's this redshirt rule makes us. We just still don't really know how they're gonna play this redshirt rule, this coaching staff. And the more I think about it, I kind of initially thought I might go over here, but the more I think about it. Mullins isn't going to play, by the time Isaiah Loudermilk gets back. And once Loudermilk gets back, that's another guy that's going to be at the top of the rotation. And I think there might just be too many guys ahead of Mullins. Now, I do think Mullins is going to play in 4 games this year. I just feel like it might be non-meaningful snaps. I think they might just get his feet wet in some of their more comfortable wins and then have him be a redshirt freshman next year and deploy him a little bit more. But like I said, maybe I'll change this one if we're the same on the last couple.
That's all right.
But,
I don't think we are. I think the last one's
you're looking at my sheet, though.
I think the last one's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I think so, too. So
that's called a tease.
Too bad we don't have a commercial break to send it to. But, okay, we got one more position and then one more final one that is sort of an overarching thing. But the offensive linemen who earn at least one first-team All-American honor, and the number is 2.5. And I pretty much, but when I say All-American honor, I pretty much am talking about, I think we're probably going to go by the 5 that the NCAA recognizes. It's not going to be just like any outlet that releases an All-American team. But of the 5, NCAA, recognized All-American teams, how many offensive linemen will make a first-team appearance? And the number is 2.5.
I'm taking the over. I think a big part of earning All-American honors on the offensive line is, I think, partially being a known commodity and obviously doing your job well and having the offense put up stats. Jonathan Taylor's going to put up stats. I think Alex Hornibrook and the receivers will too. And I'm assuming you picked this. Like last year, 2 guys had first-team All-American honors in some fashion. Bo Benchwall, David Edwards. Michael Dieter was a second-team All-American pick by the Sporting News, basically playing his worst position out of the 3. You could argue at left tackle. I mean, he just switched there last year because they needed somebody to fill the void from Ryan Ramczyk. So now that he's moved into left guard, I think all 3 of those guys are first-team All-Americans. A lot's been written about them already at this time, but as long as they're healthy and Wisconsin win games and puts up numbers, I don't know how you can say that those 3 guys aren't first-team All-Americans when it's all said and done.
So did Benchall get a first team last year? Because I didn't think he had. Maybe I'm mistaken
Did he not?
about that.
Can we Google it?
Google it while I'm giving my answer. But I'm going to go.
I believe he did. But
I'm going to go over as well. Now, when I made this 2.5, I was thinking I was going to go under because I actually thought Dieter and Edwards would get first team and maybe Benchall would get a second team, especially with Dieter back at guard. I feel like that might make it a little more difficult for both those guys to get first teams just because they're the same position and only 2 guys can get on a first team. But then I saw a preseason. I can't remember what it was. It might have been SI or something. I saw a preseason All-American team after I made this list yesterday that had Benchall on the first team and Dieter and Edwards on the second team. So I'm like, well, maybe these guys are going to split these honors and all 3 of them will get at least one first team. I think it depends on between Dieter and Benchall if there is sort of a consensus among people that one of them is the guy, which I would think Dieter would be sort of the guy at that position. But if those 2 kind of split a first team honor, I don't. Then I think it'll go over.
So Benchwall was a first team All-America by Sports Illustrated, which is probably why they listed him there again.
Okay.
So there's a lot of different outlets, and they all have their own opinions. And I think among those 5 or so.
So Sports Illustrated,
I'm taking the over.
Sports Illustrated is
they're
not
on the Bo Benchwall train.
They're not part of the 5.
Okay.
I don't believe.
So you're not counting Sports Illustrated.
I'm not counting Sports Illustrated.
All right. Well, I was counting them, so maybe we should have discussed this in advance. But I know he was an Associated Press 3rd team All-American, and obviously he was consensus 1st team All Big Ten. So I guess if you're not including SI, I don't know. I'm still going the over.
Yeah, I'm going to go over as well. I just think that in the end, I think that they're not all going to be on every first team, but I think Benchall and Dieter will kind of split first teams. Like all those will put one of those guys on the first team and probably one on the second team, and I don't think it's going to be consensus. So
very sensible opinion.
Yeah. So, and you also have to, the off chance that, Biotic just has a breakout season.
We'll
or
put him
like
on there too. Maybe over-under 3.5.
I think that, I think it'd be pretty easy to go under if I made it 3.5, but I should have made it 3 and just made you not push.
Ooh. That's basically the same thing as 2.5.
Well, but I wouldn't allow you to push, so you'd have
right.
to,
So it's like the same thing.
Okay, let's move on to the last one here. Pretty simple. Regular season wins. It's at 10.5. Are you thinking they'll be better than 11-1 or better, or 10-2 or worse?
This is the $1,000,000 question. I've been thinking about this one a lot. I am going to go with the under, and this may be like sacrilegious to the Badgers fans that are listening, but
we had Zach Heilprin on last week, and he said that he thinks they might go 9-3. So I don't think Badgers fans are going to get on you too much.
There's something that's holding me back from saying that they are an 11-1 team, which is funny because I know in the spring we had a conversation like this, and I said that they would go 11-1, and hey, they just might. But two of my colleagues at The Athletic, Bruce Feldman and Stuart Mandel, they are all in on Wisconsin, and Bruce has Wisconsin 12-0 and beating Ohio State in the Big Ten title game.
Oh my God.
And Stewart has Wisconsin 11-1 and beating Michigan State in the Big Ten title game, which means they think the Badgers are going to reach the playoffs. Obviously, this would appear to be the best chance they've ever had, and I guess, everything has to go right to have either an undefeated season or be 11-1, and I know how good the offense is, and we think the defense is going to be solid, but they have such a tough schedule. I think that was a big reason they went 12-0 last year for the first time in 105 years to have an undefeated regular season. I mean, those 5 Big Ten road games, should Wisconsin be the better team? Probably, but Penn State and Michigan on the road, Iowa on the road, and I know that they've had, some recent success with Iowa outside of a few years ago. Yeah. If that's a night game, I mean, that's tough. And even Northwestern and Purdue, they hadn't beaten Northwestern and Evanston for a long time until the last time they went down there, and Purdue's a much improved team. I'm leaning 10-2. I think they could be 11-1. I think it's going to be incredibly difficult to go undefeated again. But, that's the big question, because to me, that's the difference in whether they make the playoff or not. I think if they're 10-2 and they win the West and beat a team from the East, that's certainly not going to guarantee that they're in. But if they're 11-1, they're in.
Cover your ears, Nebraska fans, but I think those 5 road games might be their toughest 5 games on the schedule. If Purdue continues to improve and Nebraska is a year away, Northwestern was a ranked team at the end of last year. So, yeah, I agree that the schedule is a lot tougher. I went ahead and went over here. We have a third disagreement here. I'm going to say 11-1, and I think it's going to be a loss at Penn State. I think they're going to be able to go to Michigan and win. I know that's a big ask. I think Michigan's going to be a lot better this season. I think I ranked them 13th in my preseason poll. Their defense is going to be really great, but I just think this team is really good, and I know they have a lot to replace defensively. I feel a little bit better about some of the youth on defense than I did before fall camp. I was coming into a few weeks ago. I was pretty worried about the cornerback position and the defensive line. I feel a little bit better about those two now. Now I still think there's going to be some growing pains. I think there's going to be some mistakes made by some young players. But I think their offense is going to be good enough where if their defense can take a drop off and still be really good. Their defense was so good the last few years. I don't think they're going to need to be necessarily a top 5 defense in order to go 11-1. I think they just have to be a really solid, maybe top 20 defense, and their offense has to reach its potential, which I think could definitely happen. So I'm going to go ahead and go over. I'm pretty high on the team. I ranked them 6th in my preseason poll, so I think they're going to be right there. If I had to choose now, I think they probably lose in the Big Ten title game to Ohio State. Now, we'll see what happens with Ohio State with the Urban Meyer situation and everything. If they kind of take a turn for the worse, then maybe I'll change my opinion a little bit on maybe picking them to win the Big Ten this year finally and getting in. But I'm going to go over with 11-1.
And I don't disagree with any of the statements that you made at all. I just think when you're playing some of these games, particularly on the road with teams that are going to be highly motivated and are close to that caliber, sometimes all it takes is one bad mistake to ruin a season. Now, it's not the same now because of the playoff that you used to, if you weren't undefeated, you weren't going to be vying for a national championship. But I don't know. I mean, Purdue played in Camp Randall and lost by 8 points, and they were driving in the red zone before Leon Jacobs had an interception with 8.5 minutes left, and obviously Wisconsin ran it down their throat. Purdue never got the ball back, and it's just, one or two plays can make all the difference, and you would think Wisconsin would be able to make them because on paper they are the better team. It's just something is holding me back from saying that I will go the over with 10.5.
Now, do you agree that my feeling is if they go 11-1 and then win the Big Ten, they're almost certainly in the playoff this year?
I would agree, and you'd never know how it's going to shake out elsewhere. I mean, sometimes the SEC winds up getting 2 teams, which you can debate. I mean, last year, obviously, they played for the national championship, right? Alabama and Georgia. Sometimes that makes it more difficult. Does it matter which team, hypothetically, in this scenario, Wisconsin loses to? I would think so, but even having said that, if it's one of those road games in a tough environment and Wisconsin still winds up 12-1 with a West title, a Big Ten title, they're in this year. So, to me, like I said, that's the big difference between 1 and 2 losses is having a chance to playoff and a national championship.
One off topic of the over-under question before we head out.
Oh boy, you're gonna put me on the spot for this one.
A little bit.
Okay.
Week 1, Western Kentucky does not Kerry Williams start at cornerback because, for some context, guys who haven't been paying attention these last few days, he's been taking second team reps this week. Jim Leonard came out and said he needs to show a little bit more consistent effort. So this has sort of been the news of the week. That's why I wanted to bring it up. And so now we're kind of wondering what this cornerback depth chart's going to look like. So I just wanted to touch on that real quick before we left. But do you think
You're definitely putting me on the spot here. And so I'm assuming you are putting the over-under at 0.5 of how many starts he gets the opener.
Not necessarily.
Right?
Well, in the opener.
If it's an over-under,
sure. You can also say maybe he's not going to start week 1, but by week 4 he's going to be starting.
This is really hard for me to answer. I'm putting together my depth chart, and I had Kerry Williams there, and it was kind of assumed that
you got to make this decision soon anyway, right?
Yeah. But I mean, this week Deron Harrell's been there, Caesar Williams has been there, Fan Hicks has earned first team reps, and I don't know if it's Leonard. Obviously, he thinks those guys could do it if he's trying to send a message to Kerry Williams. I feel like I'm rambling on without a yes or no because I'm not sure. But for now, I think I'm going to say yes.
I think I'm in agreement. I think I'm going to say yes as well. I'm going to pick him to be starting with Caesar Williams, but it's pretty up in the air right now, and we'll have to see. And again, tomorrow is our last practice we're going to see, so we're probably going to go into game week having not a clue if he's taking back his first team reps or not. So it's going to be really interesting on next Sunday, not this coming Sunday, but the next Sunday, if he's on the first team line or not. But thanks for answering the on-the-spot question.
No worries. Thanks for having me on. This was fun.
And you can, remember, go to The Athletic, subscribe to The Athletic.
Yeah,
read Jesse's stuff.
Since we're on the podcast, I'm going to plug The Athletic. If you guys are listening and you haven't subscribed, obviously I'm biased. I would strongly encourage you to do so. It's a subscription-based model. They've got a lot of discounts going, 40% off, which is only $36 for the whole first year. And you get everything that The Athletic has to offer. So it's not just my Badgers coverage. There's an Athletic Wisconsin. We have Packers and Brewers writers, and you get all our national writers and all the regional writers for cities across North America. So all in all, it's a pretty darn good deal, and I hope that if you haven't subscribed, maybe I can talk you into it because I certainly think it's worth the price of admission.
And follow Jesse on Twitter at Jesse Temple.
That is correct.
That's correct. All right. Thanks, Jesse.
Thanks, Jason.